All right, everyone. It's great to be here. I think I get to moderate the most exciting session of the day because we're going to be talking about AI, generative AI, Gen AI. I'm Katherine Scarrow, and I am the manager of creative strategy for the Globe Content Studio. And I'm joined here today by some very smart people. I'm not going to call you AI experts, though, because we talked about it like you can't be, right?
There's no AI experts.
There's no AI experts. But this is Aashish. He's the designer on my team. And we have Brice Chan from Deloitte joining us, and he advises clients on how to integrate AI. So we've got a bit of an on-the-ground expert here. So before we begin, am I supposed to be moving slides now? I'm going to level set. I'm going to set the stage a little bit for this discussion. So it's a decade ago. We all thought AI was coming for those manual blue-collar jobs. We thought, you know, those jobs are in trouble because the robots are coming, right? White-collar jobs, on the other hand, knowledge workers like ourselves, will be fine, at least in the short term, because what we have as humans is we have this magical human brain that can't be replaced, it can't be touched. We're safe, right? Yet here we are. So in a talk recently between Bill Gates and Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, they talked about how it's actually the creative industries, like marketing, that are really embracing AI and doing it quickly. I mean, in the last 6 months, how much has changed, at least in your world. And this shift actually really shows that AI's ability to hallucinate, I'm sure you know the term, it's actually become a valuable feature. And it's unlocking new creative possibilities. So it kind of reminds us that technology often isn't predictable. It actually can take us on these uncharted paths. And it can create a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty. But there's a lot of potential, not only in making us work faster, be more productive, but I think the creative potential is what gets me really excited. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today with some people who know a lot about the subject. So I'm going to start with you, Brice, because
Sure.
I want to dive right in because you're advising clients in a time right now. If you look at the hype Gartner cycle, we're sort of in this trough of disillusionment. I think we're really, really excited, but a lot of us are like, I don't know what to do apart from say like help ChatGPT with like help me do some emails. Like when you are working with clients, like walk me through what that looks like and how you're approaching it from your end.
Yeah, I think like when you think of clients that we're talking to, especially in sort of the economic conditions that we're in right now, a lot of it comes down to cost savings, right? We need to cut costs. Our budgets are being slashed. We need something to improve our efficiency, which inevitably becomes generative AI, right? I think the other angles, and you kind of mentioned it, Katherine, right, are there's the speed, right, in terms of how fast you can move. But I think we actually should be thinking of generative AI as innovation, right? How can we actually change the way that we work? How can we change the way that we go to market and how we create content for people, right? So I think there's just too much focus today because of the economic conditions of we just need to cut costs. But really the purpose, I think, for generative AI is more about evolution, right? So I love to use analogies. Katherine, we need to talk about this.
Do it.
But think about, if you were, older like me, right? You used encyclopedias to learn things, right? Now you just Google everything, right? You don't cling to the past and buy an encyclopedia set, right? Like you just have to evolve with the times. And I think it's the evolution and innovation that is actually what generative AI is really exciting.
Right, okay. So Aashish, in your role, I know you're very plugged into this space, like we talk about it all the time. Yep. You're coming from a very different perspective as a designer. And it's really not something you can ignore in your world, right? So how do you, this is a big question, how do you foresee AI at this point changing your industry, changing what it means to be a designer?
I feel like there's two parts to it. First is, as a designer, I have to think like my process, what I do, and like where AI can help. Because even though like people are so excited about Gen AI, you cannot focus too much on the final product. You can't just think that you can put in a prompt and you'll get like the best looking designs or the best looking content. You have to, like for me, I always break down like my whole, like for example, like right now Midjourney is one of my favorite tools. Why? Because it has helped me create like much better mood boards. Like think that before I had to like go on Pinterest or like all these websites and like find these images when I'm working on a campaign. Now I can just go to Midjourney and like create exact images. But at the same time, it's like my thinking and AI sort of helping create those images. So I think like by next year, it's gonna be like part of the process a lot. And a lot of companies like Adobe's like putting in all the things within Photoshop, Illustrator, like they're forcing you to use the technology. It's not like a different tool. It's not a proprietary tool. It's like, it's now in there. Like even in their video editing, they're launching a new part where you can like replace parts of your videos rather than like generating videos. So I think like that's sort of like, it's gonna be like a good helper, sort of like a co-pilot, co-worker.
For sure, like a co-pilot, an accelerant, we say the digital doppelganger, something to help you along. I'm curious in the room, I'm not gonna ask if you've used ChatGPT. Who has not used ChatGPT? Who has not tried it? Yeah, okay. Anyone use Midjourney or any of these tools? Have you been sampling? Because Aashish, I'm gonna follow up because we talk about prompt engineering. Right. Like, is that going to become a thing that a designer needs to be like really good at some point?
Everybody. I don't think it's just like for designers. I feel like because AI is going to be part of everyone's jobs, prompting is going to be like almost like your brand guidelines now. Because like if you're just going to ChatGPT and you don't have a prompt framework, you're not going to get the results. You have to think like, you have to, first of all, like how I prompt is like, I sort of like make it act as a certain person. So I'll be like, act as a creative director. And like, this is my thing. This is what I'm working on. So giving it all the details and then doing the prompting. And then also like, I feel like maybe by next year, even I'm seeing right now, like people on Twitter don't want to share their prompts because like they are so focused on like, because they've created all these things, they don't want to share it with people. And I think like with everyone, that's going to be the same thing. And maybe in the future, companies will have like prompt guidelines. It's like prompting is the main thing, right? That's how you're getting your product out.
Right, that's your competitive advantage, right? In a world where AI is kind of democratizing a lot of stuff. Brice, let's go back to you. You're working with these clients and obviously efficiency is top of mind, but you're arguing that there's the innovation piece, the untapped potential. But what are the biggest concerns you're hearing right now? Like what are those biggest barriers to actually implementing some of these solutions? Because it's not as straightforward as we may hope it is.
Well, I think like first and foremost, there's fear, right? Like anything that's new is like, is this going to replace my job? Am I becoming obsolete? How do I evolve? And I think marketing as a function has not necessarily been a very like technical function. Like if you look at like sort of the overarching kind of time frame of a marketer, beyond just generative AI, and you'll hear me talk about ecosystems a lot. There's ecosystems of technologies. Generative AI is a piece of that ecosystem. But I think some of the previous conversations, there's social channels, there's web channels, there's email channels, there's third-party media channels. How does that content go from creation and inception into the hands or digital hands of a customer and a consumer? So I think the fear is AI is going to replace me, but I think the encouragement I would give a lot of folks is how does AI become an accelerant to what you're doing, and how does it fit in an ecosystem of capability to get into the hands of people? And I would say the other thing too is more than ever now, it's not just a marketer doing things in a marketing function. You also have to work with your IT teams. You have to work with your data teams. And it's not just handing things down an assembly line. You actually have to work closely. Like, do you have the right data? Are you prompting the right things? Do you have the right training on the models that you're using based on the content and brand guidelines that you have? There's just a lot of like work that needs to be done in unison with your peers and your stakeholders that maybe you didn't necessarily do. Like how often maybe a raise of hands, like people that were putting content or creating campaigns, how often were you talking to your IT or data teams to do that? Not too many, maybe one person. Kudos to you, right? But I think that's the evolution of the marketer, right? It's becoming less of a background function, but being more of a strategic function in partnership with the other functions within an organization.
Yeah, I mean, we actually foreshadowed that in our discussion with data and creativity. We actually structurally made our teams closer because one without the other doesn't make sense. And I would say with AI, without the right data insight, like you're not going to derive those great insights. You're not going to have that competitive advantage if your data is not set up structurally for creative to come in and make something of it. So that's interesting. One of the frameworks I've found very useful, and I'm curious what you guys think about this, but with these LLMs, I mean, it's really like time consuming and cost prohibitive for like companies to build their own systems, right? So there's this idea that you can be a maker, you can make these, but that's tough for most. You can be a taker, so you can just use GPT, you can use these like tools, or you can be a shaper. So you're using ready-built platforms like Midjourney, but you're creating competitive advantage through your own data and insights. Brice, are you seeing that with organizations, or are they very keen to make their own LLMs?
So
large language models,
yeah.
Sorry, I'm being a bit technical.
So I'd say it really depends on the organization. So going back to my prior comment about this not being just a marketer function, it's an IT function, it's a data function together. It really depends on the maturity of an organization to build and create, right? So if you have a really strong tech shop, you have a strong data function, there are certain organizations here in the Canadian market that are building all their own custom LLMs, building their own custom functions, but there are also other organizations that just don't have the size and scale to build, to have this sort of function of a combined team of marketing, IT, and data to do that, right? And the simple answer is either to shape with like a Midjourney or an Adobe, or sometimes go more open source, right? And if you're a smaller org, you can still do the same things, right? So a lot of the conversations we have when we're talking to clients is what's fit for purpose versus what is best in class. Best in class is what fits you versus what the industry is doing.
Right, okay. So Aashish, back to you. I know you're dabbling in these tools, but we often talk about what's lost when we start leaning on these tools as a creative. So how do you ensure that that content you're creating, those designs stay authentic? I mean, that's the idea of the session, but like really fresh, relevant, when we don't lose that trust and it doesn't just become sort of a sea of sameness. When we all have access to the same tools, what keeps that original?
So to start with, yes, it can easily like dilute your authenticity, your brand, like because we're using the same tools. So one of the main things I talk about is like prompting, but also like using your own storytelling techniques. And like main things in creativity is like the main things for storytelling comes from human emotions, personal experiences. These things, AI can mimic them. So you can take the data and put it in and create those stories, but it cannot like generate those. Like it can only like work on the data you have or the data that already is, it was like, fed to it. So that way, like, I feel like it's like using like 30%-ish so whenever I'm like starting working on something, I have my own ideas, then I put in the ideas, and then it kind of helps you expand those ideas. So once those then you can sort of like pick and choose the ideas, right? Like it's still your idea, but it's kind of like help you like how you can like distribute it, like what kind of design will work with. And then from there, thinking of your brand guidelines or like thinking of your users even, and then sort of like thinking of the main idea coming from it. So it's like you can expand on your idea, but I don't think you can like create new ideas from it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brice, in your role as a consultant advisor with clients, you're sharing best practices, you're helping them implement these things. But in your own life and your work as an advisor, like at Deloitte, how are you actually using AI? I'm curious. Are you using
Trade
it?
secrets. No.
Well, that's why we're here. This is why you're up here.
So a couple of different ways, right? So if you actually go to DeloitteDigital.com, the whole new branding scheme was actually generated through generative AI. So we partner with Adobe. Our whole website, everything is kind of driven off of Adobe technology. So for a consultant, you somewhat need to practice what you preach, right? So let's create our own brand guidelines, our own branding based on prompts and based on what we want to exemplify. And that's actually what we did. So there's a video, I think somewhere online, that kind of just talks through the creative process of how we came up with the new branding. It's all kind of refreshed. And so that's kind of how, I think one way that
Can I ask you a quick follow-up? What was the vibe? Like, what was the response from that?
I think it's been positive. Like we were just at Adobe Summit a couple of weeks ago. So our whole booth was, again, designed using Firefly. And a lot of people just came in to ask questions of like, how did you do it? How many prompts did it take? How many iterations? How much was machine versus you, right? So I think a lot of like good dialogue in terms of like just how to put something into production, not just dabble, which I think is important. I think the other part for us, we also do, like I'm a marketing technologist, right? So we do a lot of technical implementation work. So generative AI is more than just content creation, but it's also code and testing. And how do you write the test cases? How do you write the code? And how do you inherently almost bake in some of that savings into the services that we're offering to clients? So that's probably the other big piece that's starting to impact our industry quite a bit.
How do you stay on top of everything? And I'm going to ask the same question to you, Aashish, because it's like, even I'm really like into this space, but I find either it's overwhelming and like every day there's a new announcement, or then I'll have like the existential crisis because it's like, it's a lot. There are questions of like, what is my role going to look like, all this stuff. But how do you guys like approach this? You know a lot about the space, but how do you actually like, apart from say like testing it out yourselves, like where do you turn?
You go first?
I'll go first, sure. For me, it's like design tools, there's just too many design tools. You can open Product Hunt and you'll see like more than 100 design tools, like everything.
But how do you narrow it down?
So for me, narrowing it down, first of all, I have like a tech stack that I use. Like I use Perplexity for research. I have Midjourney. ChatGPT is great for like either research or just coming up with ideas. But then there's smaller tools like, again, like it's helping cut out a lot of repetition. That's like one of the main things that people don't think about too much. But even like as a designer, if I have to remove a background or, you know, put in like 4 videos and like make social cut downs, like these things, there's so many small tools for that. So I feel like just even like starting with going to ChatGPT or I prefer Perplexity is just like a better search engine AI focused. You can just go in, hey, this is my problem. This is a very boring task and I don't want to do it. And it will go in and help you find a tool for you. So I think like there's a lot of testing right now and like you should keep testing. But I think for designers, it's a very fast changing space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about you?
So I have the privilege of working with lots of clients. So a lot of how I keep up is actually asking clients what they're trying and what they're testing. And within the realm of confidentiality, sharing ideas of process or concepts to take with each other, right? So it's a bit of a community play here of like, well, okay, people have tried this worked, this didn't work. People tried this worked, this didn't work. I think the other thing that is important in terms of keeping up is, again, not just the creation of content, but the ecosystem of how content gets from a marketer or a designer out to an end channel. So if you think about the technology that's necessary to do that, all of those technology vendors are implementing generative AI built into those tools. So for tools that we've implemented in the past, how are we actually thinking about generative AI and how it actually impacts the usage of those tools on top of the creation of the content? So an example I would say is when you think about digital asset management, for those maybe not familiar, just the storage of content, there are new features and functions with like AI assistant prompts where you can ask, show me all the images from last year's campaign for back to school. And it will pull all the content, again, for inspiration before you put it into a tool to create new content. So it's also just part of the process of like ideation and creation, innovation, right? Not cost savings or acceleration, but those are the things that I think are quite interesting in terms of how you continue to stay on top of it.
When you're working with clients or partners, and maybe I'm answering the question in the question, are they open and receptive and excited and ready to dive in? Or is it more of like a FOMO sense where like they know they need to do it, but it's difficult? Do you find a mix, or are most of them embracing it because it's like they know that's what they have to do?
I think it's a mix, to be honest. I think it is a mix because generative AI is not just a marketing function, right? Or it's not just an application of marketing. It can apply to contact centers. It can apply to your front line. It can apply to finance. Like there's so many different applications of it. So when you think about an organization, do you have the gravitas or the executive support to do something within marketing and push the marketing agenda? That's where I think organizations are still not quite clear on setting up an AI governance function. How do you push the agenda from a marketer's perspective? So that's where I think there's a bit of a challenge. I think where organizations are doing well, they're not just looking at generative AI, they're looking at, again, as an ecosystem of like impacting personalizations, the deprecation of cookies. There's a great chat earlier, right? I think those types of conversations with an application of generative AI is the accelerant to do something bigger. But I think organizations that are going straight as marketing generative AI becomes harder because lots of other functions are also thinking of AI.
We haven't addressed the elephant in the room, which is like the risks of AI. And I mean, they've been omnipresent since AI came out. It's not like they're new, but I feel like Gen AI is especially bubbling to the surface concerns around IP. Even hallucinations, as I mentioned, can be a positive, can be problematic. Bias in our results. Are these, maybe in the design world, do risks come up a lot? Or is it more like we need to speed ahead and we'll worry about regulation later?
I mean, there aren't that many regulations yet, but I feel like governments and companies are like pushing, and OpenAI especially, they're pushing a lot. But I also feel like bias is a big thing with AI, especially like with hallucinations. So that's why like the human aspect is so important. You have to like double check. A lot of times what I do is whenever I am coming up with ideas, I actually ask AI to be the critic. So I'll ask him like, hey, this is the targeted audience, or like, how is it like the right way of doing this or not? And even when AI is producing ideas for me, I can like ask for like the reasonings behind it, so that there's like less bias and like, you know, it's not just hallucinating again.
Interesting. Yeah. Are risks a concern? Is this something you talk about?
So I would say yes, absolutely, right? I think that's actually probably the primary driver from people focusing on dabbling versus execution. It's the risk, like what happens if something goes wrong? It's, to be honest, no different than what happens if I create something on my own and then publish it and it's still, you know, for whatever reason, not great. The risk is still there. It's just the risk is more apparent because you have less control, right? So I think the governance of how you manage that risk still applies. It's no different than physically doing it yourself or using generative AI to do it.
Right. So I'm not sure how many of you in organizations are really embracing Gen AI. I know in our organization, we talk about it a lot, and it's certainly something we can't ignore at the Globe and Mail. In our own roles, a framework I've been kind of interested in is this idea that looking at your role as a marketer, what could I automate in my function, those like really routine tasks that aren't maybe the best use of my time, what can I augment using AI? And then what is that bucket of skill, responsibilities and duties that AI shouldn't replace? And I think it's a really interesting exercise because there is this fear of like, AI is going to replace me. But I think when you do that exercise, if you go away from the session, maybe think about that, what's left in the human category becomes so much more important. And I think that's, I found that really helpful. I don't know if you've done a similar exercise, if you've really kind of thought through
I have definitely tried that. And I feel like, especially as a designer, there's so many repetitive tasks. For me, I feel like, especially if you have design systems in your company, it can definitely help with like even wireframing. Some things, I think one thing it can't replace is like the human creativity, right? Like, so you can build on top of the things that you already build, and it'll help you like expand on it. But whenever it comes to like creating a new idea, it sort of has to start with the human. Other than that, one other thing is like I have to do a bit of like coding and code editing in my day-to-day, and like for that it's amazing. Like I use ChatGPT or like Copilot, and it helps me take out like all the bugs or even like test codes or like create code. It's like really good with that as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you done a similar exercise? You thought about that?
Yes. Right. I think for us, the function as consulting is same thing, right? Yeah. What are the roles that used to exist that we can automate? What are the roles we can get rid of? How can we become more efficient and drive more value for our clients and our customers? It's an evolving process, is what I would say, right? Because when you look at, again, an ecosystem of technology, there are new technologies that are coming out that require people, right? Yes. You can't avoid it. But once you commoditize some of those technologies, then what can you do to automate it? So I think it depends on the scale of evolution of certain tech. Like I think if you talk about email, I think it's been around for a long time. There's a lot of automation potential there. When you think about customer data platforms and personalization engines, a lot newer. You can't really automate something like that. It requires a lot of human intervention, at least for now.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna get the red card soon. I'm just gonna flip to this next slide that I created a song and an image. This is just for fun. It's the lightning round, okay? So, is there an AI tool that you can't live without at this point?
Midjourney.
Midjourney.
I love my Google Home. Like as simple as that.
Okay, that's fine. AI generated art, threat or opportunity?
I think it's both because I don't think it can replace artists, but at the same time, I feel like there's a new genre of art out there.
Okay.
Opportunity.
Opportunity. Final thoughts. You have 5 seconds.
Generative AI is going to be an accelerant, right? So I think a lot of fear is around it's going to replace this and replace that and my job. It's going to accelerate change, right? It's just thinking about what that change means, I think, to you.
You can't run away from it. You got to embrace it.
Embrace it. Keep an open mind. Thank you so much, Brice and Aashish. Great insights. Have an open mind. Test it out.